Welcome back. This time we're talking about Timeless, Season 2, Episode 4, The Salem Witch Hunt. After a week off for Easter, we're back with our time travelers, and we pretty much immediately pick up with the cliffhanger from the previous episode, namely that Wyatt's long-dead wife, Jessica, is now back alive. Now, at the time, I assumed that Jessica being back alive had something to do with Rufus changing the past, in which he gave Hedy Lamarr the heads up to not let her patent expire, and thus she is now a modern day or new version of Bill Gates. And I could have seen how that could have had a massive effect on the past. Now, as we learn in this episode, that's not the case. It turns out that Rittenhouse went back in time to a specific point in time and presumably saved Jessica's life. I think it was 1980 is what they went back to, which is going to be a little interesting because of the rule that we learned in the first season that you're not supposed to travel within your own time stream. Now, if you've watched my videos from that season, you know that there were a few inconsistencies with that, with Rittenhouse's original pilot, whose name right now is completely escaping me. But in any event, that is right now what we're being led to believe is the reason that Jessica's alive. And the episode opens with Wyatt telling Lucy, which obviously has big implications for them because they had finally consummated their will they won't they relationship. And Lucy on her end tells Wyatt, you need to do what you need to do. You've got Jessica back, and ultimately lies to Agent Christopher and everyone else that Wyatt said he wasn't going to come back, even though he had offered to do so. Meanwhile, Lucy and Rufus have to team up with Flynn to go back to the Salem witch trials because that's where the mothership has most recently gone. And they get caught up in an adventure in colonial times, which is very scary for Gia because she had that vision of Rufus killing a man with blood on his hands and everything else. And she tells them about these visions that she's been having, or tells Rufus. Makes him promise that he won't tell anyone else, and he promptly tells Lucy and Flynn, which I thought was interesting because he really doesn't trust Flynn at all in this episode. They ultimately find out that Abby Franklin, the father of Benjamin Franklin, has been wrapped up into the Salem witch trials, in which she was not originally a part of, thanks to Rittenhouse. And ultimately it's revealed that it's Lucy's mother who did it, who then also implicates Lucy herself, because Nicholas Keynes is not convinced that Carol will go through with taking out her daughter. And Carol argues with him, saying, look, this is your great-granddaughter. How can you do that? And he is a true believer. She has broken with the faith and thus must be dealt with. But as we find out, Carol still can't truly go through with it and gives Lucy a way to escape her bonds before she's hung along with the rest of the witches. This was a pretty fun episode. Going that far back in time is always interesting and a lot of fun. And they really had a lot of fun with Flynn in this episode, where he was just basically, give me a gun, and spent a good portion of the episode basically trying to find a gun. As someone who was pretty much the main villain of the majority of the first season, to have him be almost comic relief was a little interesting. They came close to overplaying that, but I don't think they did, at least in my opinion. I like I said, I just had a lot of fun with it. Meanwhile, back in the present, Wyatt finds out that his relationship with Jessica over the previous 6 years, of which memories he no longer has, or never had, because he was never part of that new timeline, has not been good. And that she is delivering divorce papers to him. So whatever has happened, their relationship has soured. I had actually forgotten that the reason, or at least one of the reasons why she was killed in the first place, was because they had gotten into an argument and he left her on the side of the road. Which goes to show that this relationship has always been rather volatile and perhaps doomed. We don't know that yet. But it's obvious, and it was obvious throughout the first season, but now that Jessica's back, it's very obvious that Wyatt has idealized his relationship with Jessica. And a lot of his feelings towards her are clouded in the guilt he feels over her death. So I really don't see a healthy relationship growing out of this. Even 6 years prior, they were arguing and somehow managed to make it last as long as they did in this new timeline. But I don't think he's going to be coming into this relationship if Jessica does relent and decide to give them a second chance from a place of any kind of real anything that's going to build a healthy relationship. Like I said, he is kind of idolized her and this memory of her, and only thinks about the good times, and part of probably to increase his own guilt over her death. So I'm betting they're going to make a play at this. And we'll just have to wait and see if it actually works. Now, there's always the chance, as Agent Christopher talked about, that she may be some kind of Rittenhouse agent because of them saving her life. I don't know if they really need to go down that route again. They've sort of tapped that well a few too many times already. But it remains to be seen if where Jessica's true allegiances lie. I did find it interesting that Wyatt didn't just hem and haw and say, "Well, I can't tell you." No, he just brought her to the bunker and showed her everything. And of course, she got the surprise at the end when the time machine actually arrived. Going back to the past, talking about relationships, maybe I was reading into it a little too much, but I don't think I was. I think they're trying to tease a potential relationship between Flynn and Lucy, or at least one of maybe camaraderie over shared experiences that's going to ruffle Wyatt's feathers. You could definitely see that he felt as a sort of a third wheel when Flynn was helping Lucy out of the time machine after she had been hurt. So that's going to definitely be an added element to this relationship soup that we have going on right now. Also, back in time, Rufus meets the man that he thinks is, or that Jaya had warned him about, and Flynn roughs him up, and that ultimately results in him attacking Rufus at the end of the episode. And although Rufus refuses to shoot him, he still dies anyway. And for that, he blames Jaya, and that seemed a little unfair. Although, just sort of a immediate aftermath of such a traumatic event, he's definitely, lashing out a little bit, but he does tell her he doesn't want to know any more about her visions. We're going to see how that plays off. I'm presuming that sooner or later she's going to see something really bad happen to one of our heroes, because that's just how these types of stories go. Then the main other story of this episode was, again, Carol and her attempts to prove to Nicholas that either Lucy is worth saving or she's willing to kill Lucy. And she tries to play it off at the end where Flynn was there and he rescued Lucy. And Nicholas really wasn't buying it. And not helping Carol's case is the fact that Emma is very obviously trying to make a power play within Rittenhouse. And we see already that people are, not looking at Carol as someone who can take care of the Lucy problem. We had in a previous episode where one of the underlings basically refused to take her orders because Other people within the organization were saying, she's not unbiased in this particular instance. So it really feels that like Carol's place in Rittenhouse is on very, very shaky ground. And when you're on shaky ground with Rittenhouse, you really typically don't have a lot of time left. So I'm not sure how long Carol's going to be around for this world. But just going to have to wait and see on that one as well. Overall, like I said, this was a fun episode. I liked the time travels where we go really far back in time. They had a lot. They managed to have a pretty serious episode about the witch trials, which are now the Salem Witch Revolt. And there is no longer a term witch hunt, which is part of our episode title this week. That was pretty fun as well. And that does bring me to something that I almost forgot to talk about, and that is the fact that Lucy seems to have picked up Rufus's sentiments from the first season, where helping people in horrible situations is more important than keeping to the timeline. And that was always something that she was always very keen on in the first season. But that was also something as part of her love of history, which was very much connected to her mother. And she is basically trying to disassociate herself with her mother. And I can see that this is something that's coming out of it. And I can see potentially in future episodes where she may even go out of her way to change the past just to thumb her nose at her mother, who has apparently thrown her love of history out the window as well, considering she was willing to essentially erase Benjamin Franklin from the history books in this episode. So yeah, they managed to pack a lot of different storylines in this episode, but still have a cohesive time travel of the week. I've really enjoyed this season. I haven't really been looking at the ratings to see what our chances are of getting another renewal. We're just going to have to wait and see on that one, as we typically do with shows like this. But for now, I think I've talked enough about this episode. There was a lot to talk about. But I want to turn it over to you. What did you think of this episode? What were your favorite parts? And what's your favorite episode so far this season? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be sure to respond. As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some of my other TV and movie reviews, and until next time, watch out for runaway horse and buggies.